Hello friends and fellow book lovers! Welcome to my March Reading Journal recap. We're going to jump right into the video today and start things off a little differently by starting at the front of my journal and flipping until we get to my 2025 visual bookshelf. Normally I start by adding my books read to my book log spread, and then add in all the fun parts at the beginning of my journal later. In saying that, March was a slower reading month for me, and I didn't end up reading anything from my recommended reads or my books to read list. I also didn't meet any of my goals, so starting with my bookshelf feels like a fun way to get the video rolling. This month's additions to the bookshelf include the following: From Bad to Cursed, Dragons of a Fallen Sun, The Queen's Gambit, Nothing But Blackened Teeth, and The Body. I'll admit that I had a bit of a slow start to this month's reading. For some reason, I was finding it hard to pick up any books or get into a reading groove. I ended up being in a bit of a slump for a few days where I didn't read anything, but I think maybe I just needed those few days to reset after how incredible the reads of the first 2 months were. I'm still happy with the books that I got through, even though I'd really hoped to be able to check off my read 20 books goal this month. I guess we'll just have to wait until April. Flipping the page, let's update the series tracker. I read the second book in the Witches of Thistle Grove series, so I'll fill in the second circle. And I also started a new series called The War of Souls. This new series is a big, sweeping, epic fantasy that I'm really looking forward to continuing. Next, let's fill in both my book log and my visual tracker with the books mentioned previously on my bookshelf spread. First, I'm going to add in From Bad to Cursed, which is the second book of the Witches of Thistle Grove series. It was a great little romantasy read with an enemies to lovers subplot that I really enjoyed. The characters were great and relatable. We got to see how previous characters and their relationships from the first book continued on, and it was an overall fantastic read. I gave this book 4.5 stars. Next up is Dragons of a Fallen Sun, the first book in the War of Souls trilogy. I've had this series on my bookshelf at home for years, and for some reason, I've never attempted to read it. Earlier I mentioned I had a bit of a reading slump at the beginning of the month. Although I had chosen a different book to start, I found myself putting it off for several days before I realized I was craving something different than what I had originally picked. Something that was a fantasy full of adventure, intrigue, and magical creatures. And this was exactly what I needed. It is everything a quintessential fantasy book should be, and I can't believe it took me so long to finally pick this up. Of course, now the problem is that I've found out that there are many more Dragonlance books that came before this trio, so I guess I have my work cut out for me. This one was 5 out of 5 stars. After watching The Queen's Gambit on Netflix earlier this year, I knew I really wanted to read the novel to compare the two. I'm very happy to say that the Netflix adaptation was spot on, and the book did not disappoint. Although some of the language, mostly the chess notation specifically, were sometimes hard to visualize and understand, it was still a solid read. And if you enjoyed the Netflix show, I'm confident you'll enjoy this book too. 4 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I read 2 small novellas, Nothing But Blackened Teeth, which is a short little horror story that was just okay for me. Although elements in it were spooky at times, it didn't feel as fleshed out as I had hoped, and ultimately didn't give me that scare factor I wanted given the creepy cover image. This got 3 out of 5 stars for me. And finally, I finished off the month with The Body, which is a coming-of-age tale by Stephen King that you may know better as the book that inspired the cult classic movie Stand By Me. It was really interesting to read a Stephen King story that didn't have his signature horror touch, but it was a good little read that often made me pause and look back on my own childhood with fondness. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I love looking at all these covers put together. It brings me a lot of joy to see them laid out like this. Next, let's unveil the book of the month. March's pick is Dragons of a Fallen Sun. Not only was it a solid novel that grabbed me from the very first few pages, but it had everything I was looking for in an epic sweeping fantasy. I hope the next two in the trilogy are just as great. Let's flip over to the yearly stats spread and add in this month's numbers. In books read this month, I'll fill it in with 5 books read. For reading types, I read 2 physical books and 3 audiobooks. In books by the page, I read 3 books in the 1 to 200 plus pages column, 1 in the 300s, and lastly, 1 in the 600s. For genres read this month, I'll add 1 in fantasy, 1 in horror, 1 in romantasy, and 2 in fiction. Lastly, for when was it written, let's add 2 in the 1980s column, 1 in the 2000s, and 2 in the 2020s. Moving on, let's flip over to our monthly overview for March and fill in all the details. For total books read, I'll add in 5, and I'll also add 1,539 for total pages read this month. March's best book was Dragons of a Fallen Sun, and the worst was Nothing But Blackened Teeth. Luckily for me, I had a much easier time picking out the best and worst, as there were no ties or DNFs this month. Next, I'll add in the books read over the month, with the date finished, each book's page count, and the rating. I'm starting to realize that this is a bit repetitive, given I've already cataloged my reads in my book log and visual tracker, but it's something to keep in mind for next year's journal. Lastly, I'll dot in my little mini calendar in the top corner to visually show the finish date and genre of each book that I completed this month. Despite the repetitiveness of logging all my books again, I really like having this little overview for each month. It's handy to be able to see what you read along with some of the core stats at a glance. Next, let's continue by adding the media I consumed this month. Flipping to the TV shows and series watch spread, I'm going to add the only show we watched this month, Yellowstone Seasons 1 through 5. This show hooked us immediately and consumed our lives for about 3 weeks solid. Although I'd heard it was good, I didn't realize how good it was going to be. My husband and I both jokingly referred to it as cowboy gangsters, and it was a wild, crazy ride that I'm glad we decided to watch. I've never wanted to ride a horse more than I have these past few weeks. 5+++ stars out of 5. Turning the page, let's add to the movies watched spread. In my last video, you saw me add in the Lord of the Rings trilogy that my husband and I watched as a marathon over 3 days after he finished reading the books. Less than 2 weeks later, we had another weekend marathon where we watched the Hobbit trilogy after he finished reading The Hobbit. Here, I'm adding The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, The Desolation of Smaug, and The Battle of the Five Armies. If I'm being truthful, neither of us enjoyed the Hobbit movies as much as the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. We felt these movies were drawn out and longer than they needed to be, with a lot of unnecessary fluff added. For me, I rated them as 4 stars, 3 stars, and 3.5 stars. On the Besties Binge Watch page, my friend and I finished Three Body Problem on March 5th. We both really enjoyed the series and are definitely looking forward to a second season. I'm also looking forward to reading the novel it's based off of sometime soon. Next, I'm adding in The Midnight Club to this spread, as we just started watching it on March 13th. We're both huge fans of Mike Flanagan and his horror series, and we're really loving it so far. And with that, we finished our reading journal recap for March. As always, thank you so much for watching and joining me in these videos. I'm so happy I get to share my love of reading with you all, and I hope you'll continue to join me in my next videos. If you enjoyed this video or any of my other videos, please like and subscribe to my channel and leave a comment down below. Happy reading, and see you again soon. Bye!